for a Monday morning tech chat. Of course, I'm going to hold off for just a second before jumping into the show. Do a little retweeting, get the show out there on the socials and on the interwebs before this officially kicks in on all platforms. Welcome to the Monday Morning Tech Chat. I, of course, am Juan Carlos Bagnell, some gadget guy, where we start the week off right. News stories throughout the week. We cover the top headlines, and then we move on to the next piece of media or the next piece of news, and we don't always get to come back and chat about what's going on in the world of technology. And so this is a good time for us to check in, see what's going on. I'm already seeing some people lighten up in the chats. I'm seeing TG West on Periscope, Fat Produce on the YouTube live chat. This streams live on Twitch, on Periscope, and YouTube all at the same time because I don't feel like supporting any one specific platform. And Demir Frank, hey, let's get this started. I love that attitude. So, first up, just a little bit of housekeeping. We had a debate a little bit more than a week ago. We did another geek debate with Joshua Vergara and with TK Bay. I'll go into a screen share right quick. And I'm going to detail the results here on the Monday Morning Tech Chat. So, the debate thesis was buttons are better than gestures on our smartphones. Hey, James Vincent, I see you on Periscope. What's going on, sir? And this was a fun, spirited, lively discussion between two of my all-time favorite tech bros. Hilariously enough, we all live in Southern California, probably within a half hour of each other, and we were still only able to get this up and running via Google Hangouts. But I want to share the results. We had a lot of comments. We had a ton of live chat between these two master debaters, and I think it's time to detail this. So Josh was debating in favor of buttons. TK was debating in favor of gestures, and I'm not terribly surprised that buttons won, given the audience of people that watch my videos. So 61% of people agreed with the premise and still agreed with the premise after the voting was done. Buttons are better than gestures. Only 1% of those folks who agreed at the beginning changed their mind. Now, TK did mount a formidable defense of gestures, swipes, and movements, other ways of controlling our phone. 32% disagreed and still disagreed, but 3% disagreed at the start. 3% of people who watched the video thought that gestures were better than buttons, but then changed their mind. And so that's that to me is one of the most exciting things about a debate, is not just saying who wins. I don't like the thumbs up, thumbs down. I don't like I'm voting for Josh because I like Josh better, or I'm voting for TK because I like TK better. It's really seeing who was more persuasive during the overall debate. Excuse me. And it would seem that Josh was more persuasive than TK. So you can catch that video. It's also a standalone episode on the SGGQA podcast RSS feed if you just want to listen, because it's about a 45-minute discussion. I mean, there's a lot of, like me setting up the rules at the top and then wrapping up the podcast at the end. But that's definitely something that I think is fun to check out, especially for some future topics that we've got coming up. The Geek Debate is something I'm hoping I'll be able to pull off monthly, and in May, I'm trying to pin down Tank Girl and Mr. Mobile. Michael Fisher and Miriam Joire. I've probably just mispronounced her last name, but I really want to get those two in a good back and forth, a good dialogue, and a structured debate, especially for Tank Girl, because I find in a lot of conversations, Tank Girl tends to win conversations just because she is such a forceful personality, and I want to see what happens with Tank Girl when we put her on like a time limit. And then now someone else gets to speak, so we'll have to see how that goes. I'm pretty excited about that. So I want to jump into some news. We've got some questions and comments here. James Vincent just finished work, and it was a crappy day. I'm sorry to hear that, man, but I'm glad you're joining us, and hopefully we'll have some fun discussion for you. From Mustafa, do you personally feel the need for more RAM in current phones? And I'll open this one up. Do you guys think RAM is a problem on our smartphones? I'm still using some older chipset devices with 4 gigabytes of RAM, and I don't necessarily feel like that experience is being overly hamstrung by the RAM. I think there are other major issues contributing to smartphones today, like software support, updates, bug fixes, that would probably go a lot longer towards improving the day-to-day usage of a phone than just brute force putting in more memory. And we're going to be talking about memory quite a bit, what with some news about Samsung profits and then also Samsung investigations. From Mr. A, what do you think of the P20 Pro camera? And from Demir Frank immediately after that, and I'm assuming he's replying to Mr. A, it's overrated. I haven't used the P20 Pro camera yet. I know I've been saying this, and you guys are probably going to be super annoyed with me, but I am just about done with the Honor View 10. Actually spending time using the phone and then getting into a camera review. So there will be a standalone, full, in-depth camera review of the View 10. A very interesting challenge for Honor. Mid-range price point, no optical image stabilization, but some pretty killer camera sensors. So as soon as I'm done with this podcast, I'm going to wrap up that video, and then that video is going to be on the Patreon. From @FatProduce, talking about the geek debate with buttons versus gestures. It's really interesting as phones like the Key 1, the BlackBerry Key 1, integrate both buttons and gestures. And I thought that was a debate point that TK kind of missed on pinning Josh. Like, we brought it up in the questions, but you know, you've got this keyboard and you've got these buttons, but one of the major aspects of that phone is being able to swipe and navigate around on that keypad. And I thought he probably could have scored a few more points there. From Adita, can't wait for Mr. Mobile on the debate. Me neither. I think he's going to be a lot of fun. From Fat Produce, I think more RAM is good for future proofing as long as software updates come for those older phones that have more RAM. Yeah, again, future proofing is really tough in the mobile space right now because I kind of feel like manufacturers are trying to artificially create pain points that will encourage us to buy newer devices sooner than we need to. We just saw headlines. Samsung going to be delivering Oreo for the Galaxy S7. And you're like, well, that's a long time. If you bought a Galaxy S7 and you looked at the timetable on Android operating system releases, and you thought, you know, like, hey, I spent $700 on this premium product from a top-tier manufacturer, and they're just now getting around to updating my phone. Oreo came out when? And this was another story I actually cut from the lineup. But again, I think it was from 9 to 5 Mac, talking about adoption rates. And, you know, iOS 11.3 is on 70% of iPhones versus Android Oreo is on 5% of Android phones or something like that. I forget what the exact numbers were. But, you know, like, this is an increasingly untenable situation for Android fans, in my opinion. We should be demanding better support from products that cost as much as these manufacturers are charging for a mobile device that lives in your pocket. From Ranga, y'all are like the Avengers of tech news. If y'all are debating, then it's Civil War all over. So it's funny. My wife has seen Avengers Infinity War, and she did not enjoy that movie. We had a lot of discussion about it. I haven't seen it yet, but unfortunately, the movie's already been pretty much spoiled for me. It's impossible to be on the internet and not have that movie ruined for you. And I think Marvel just made a small misstep in not making a bigger deal out of the fact that this was supposed to be a two-parter, you know, that this storyline was going to continue through 2 movies, at least 2 movies, let alone all the standalone films that'll be influenced by what happens in this. And I was reading through a Reddit thread, too, just like the number of people that individuals were seeing leaving the theater visibly upset by what happened. And again, not really expressing that this was going to be a multi-part story, I think could be you know, sort of a bummer. From Sharil, so can we have #WanTechTalk as the show hashtag? I was sort of flirting around with reviving SGGQA, which doesn't mean anything other than, I mean, it's Some Gadget Guy question and answer, which was what the podcast was originally created off of. So I don't know. I mean, it would be nice to have some kind of hashtag, but then again, you guys are really awesome in the live chat, so I'm just trying to hang out with you guys here, both on YouTube and on Periscope. So from Sharil, I thought the OS update is supposed to be mitigated with the new Google project. What is the name again? The one with the modular updates. Project Trouble. So Project Trouble is another step in the right direction. Again, it should make operating system updates easier from a resources point of view. And then it also is kind of built around the idea of encouraging manufacturers to support Google's best practices on what Android should resemble. But that doesn't necessarily mean that those manufacturers are going to push out. So if Samsung decides to sit on an OS update for a Galaxy phone, there's not really a whole lot Google can do about that. I mean, Google can make some sort of token like, oh, Samsung's not playing nice, but Samsung occupies like the top selling spot, so we can't piss them off too much. So I guess we'll just be real angry about it. But here's another Samsung phone. It's going to cost $900. Yay! That's how you'll get the new software. You just have to buy a new $900 phone. See, that's all it is. That's easy. From Peter Ford, hey Juan, these little chats are really good ideas talking about the geek debate. I'm big on buttons and some gestures, but gestures get too confusing. And how many can you keep in your brain? It's like passwords. And that was actually a really important talking point during the debate, was talking about a consistency of user interface. Gestures can be really good for customizing. Say you've got a skin on your phone, but we've also had discussions. Like we had I forget exactly what his title was, but he was someone in charge of technology discussion for AARP. And so when we get into gestures and we're making changes for change's sake, we're actually doing a disservice to a humongous part of the computing technology consumer demographics. A lot of people out there, you start talking about making changes that force you to manage the phone as opposed to using the phone for what you really want to get done. And you have to relearn how to do basic things like, where's the home button? Oh, it's not a home button anymore. It's a home swipe. Well, in that split fraction of a second, your brain is occupied by actually managing the device and not doing the thing that you want it to do. And I see this a lot with camera apps. Samsung making random changes just for the sake of building in stickers or live preview modes or other things. And the Galaxy S7 had the camera app right. I think since the Galaxy S7, every successive Samsung camera app has been a step in the wrong direction for focusing on your subject, looking through the viewfinder, and as efficiently as possible, getting the best possible photo or video that you can. And anything since the S7 has been a step backwards for extra clutter, for not maximizing screen real estate as we've gone to taller and skinnier screens, and then for moving things and changing things that didn't need to be changed for improving photography. So that kind of stuff drives me nuts. We've got some questions about Sprint and T-Mobile. We're going to be getting to that later in the show, Andrew. James W., I actually would like Sailfish's OS to be a big player. I think we could do well with a third place upstart. You know, back when we had Palm or Microsoft, we saw more competition. And this is also going to play into Sprint and T-Mobile. More companies, more competition, better for consumers. Are we going to see some issues with less competition in a space? Because Android versus iOS is not a very interesting discussion. Android and iOS versus some distant third player who's doing something really provocative or really, really trying to push some boundaries would be a lot more interesting discussion. And from Cheryl, I have to agree with Juan in regards to the S7 camera app. Pity Samsung is trying to be the phone for everyone too hard. I don't like all-rounders. They're not phones for me. I like to see a manufacturer really make a statement about what demographic their device is for, as opposed to charging a lot for a phone that does everything well. I'm not saying that there should be severe compromises for using a phone, but, it's why I stick to devices like the V30 and acknowledge the compromises of a phone like the V30. And also, I'm very clear about who should not buy the V30 because of the focus on multimedia and content creation. But ditto the BlackBerry. If you're super into gaming and high-quality multimedia on the go, don't get a BlackBerry. That's not the phone for you. But if you need the absolute best communications device that you can put in your pocket, then you're really missing out by not considering a key one. So I've got some great questions in there. David Baptista, Peter Ford, Sharil, RJ. Hold on to some of those comments because we're going to be talking about some stuff later in the show, and I want to get to some Q&A at the end of the show. But I want to jump in real quick. Not a story that I'm going to spend a lot of time on, but it's something that I tweeted, and I got kind of some interesting responses from people, but I'm going to put this in the category of, I think this is a bad play. And this is Ford is going to stop making all passenger cars except the Mustang. So Ford is in an ugly position. Their cars are not selling well. So as a major manufacturer of automobiles, what is their response? Is it to look at the cars in the market that are selling well and try and compete? No, they're going to take their ball and go home. No more Taurus. Looking at just like a couple little brand names through 2020, like Fiesta and Focus, that will live on for a couple years yet, but they're going to be devaluing a huge chunk of their market. This is coming from NBC News. If you're looking to buy a car from Ford, soon you'll only have one option: the Mustang. Again, the Mustang having sort of its own cult status outside of the rest of Ford ecosystem. So what they're going to do is just lean heavily on pickups, SUVs, crossover utility vehicles. So taking some of those car platforms, putting in some sort of fake part-time all-wheel drive, four-wheel drive option, and then calling it a crossover. And that seems to do better. It seems to sell better in the United States. I think this is a really bad play. It's a bummer because Ford as an institution has the resources to really upset a market. They could look at what Tesla's doing for success, rebrand something, come up with a new car brand. I see Media Man. I see Victor Correa. See you guys watching on the Periscopes. Welcome to the show. This is a major bummer. They could really upset some of the progress being done by smaller companies, boutique companies, and then push up against a Volkswagen. I don't know. There's a documentary series that just made me incensed because I used to be the biggest Volkswagen fan, especially their TDI tech. I think it's called Dirty Money. You go and you watch that and you see how regulation is being conducted in Europe right now over air quality. Living in California, coming from California. I tried 4 times to get that sentence out. Living in California and coming from the perspective of someone who is very concerned about air quality in a car-heavy state, seeing what's going down in the EU with players like Volkswagen and how they play fast and loose with emission standards is very disappointing. So anyway, James Vincent, I'm gutted. I've only ever had a Focus for 12 years. So yeah, you look at this major automobile manufacturer, they should be able to go toe-to-toe with Tesla. This is one of the reasons why Tesla's market cap is so artificially high. It's because no one else is really joining the competition in a meaningful fashion. I think the closest would be a player like the Chevy Volt. You've made a new car brand. It's a Chevy, but the Volt is its own sort of internal brand name within Chevy. And you also made it a nice vehicle. You didn't try and cheap out with your worst econo egg car cramming in an electric motor that no one wants to buy. That's not the way to combat nice. It's the same problem I have with like youth branding in automobiles. The Nissan Rogue. No one wants a Rogue. You know who wants Rogues? Old people, because you're marketing them as young mobiles. And old people are looking at those like, oh, they get good gas mileage. They're reasonably inexpensive. That's a good practical choice for me. Young people aren't looking at that and finding that desirable. This is from Ricky Fox Tech. Oh, what's up, Ricky? How's it going, man? Plot twist. Ford makes an all-electric car brand. See, if they did something like that, I would instantly walk back all of my ire. But the current push towards Ford representing pickups, SUVs, and crossover utility vehicles makes me crazy frustrated. This is only good policy for now while gas is super cheap thanks to initiatives like fracking. I mean, that's a bummer. When we talk about the environmental impact, the long-term overall impact, and then anything which disrupts the oil market is instantly going to make an SUV feel like a painful purchase again. I was living in California during the last bad gas crisis where gas was $4, $5 a gallon. And you would see people on the news, it's not fair. I've got to fill up my SUV and it's so expensive. And you're like, well, you bought a really fuel inefficient vehicle. You should know what you're getting into and that gas prices fluctuate. This is not a surprise. So again, I think it's a bummer. So from Bear Paw 34, but it's only Ford doing it, right? Have other companies followed? I don't think many companies are going to follow in Ford's footsteps. Again, this seems like a really bad short-term reaction to their current product lines. This looks like a corporate decision where over the next couple fiscal quarters we can save money by eliminating these manufacturing lines, and we'll focus on these products which are currently selling well in these categories. But that's not a solution for long-term growth. It's a bad solution for competition, and it devalues the Ford name over time. A car brand like the Taurus could be revived with something really interesting today. If they had jumped on early for hybrid technology, if they had jumped on for EVs, if they had actually pushed the boundaries in the markets that make sense post-financial crisis. Because again, Nissan got burned. Nissan got burned post-Leaf. They were making a lot of noise about transitioning. I think I forget again. I forget what the numbers were because we're talking about Nissan in 2007. But they were making claims to something outlandish, like 50% of our fleet is going to be all EV by 2010. And then the financial crisis in 2007, 2008 happened, and all of those plans evaporated. But this would now be the right time to start reinvesting in that as we find a Tesla, which is starting to find its footing on mid-priced sedans, sedans in the middle of the market, which entice consumers like me. My next car is not going to be a gas-powered four-door sedan. It's going to be an EV. And right now, the only company that's making something desirable at my price tier with the features I want, and I'll have to deal with one of the worst dashboard implementations of all time, but is Tesla. So if that's the game, then that's how we're going to play the game. Ford could throw their automotive expertise at the problem and probably arrive at something a lot more desirable, a lot faster, lower margins, and then just have to source batteries. But at the same time, Tesla is also investing in their battery manufacturing capabilities here in the United States too, to try and head off some of the costs associated with shipping batteries around the world. So this is a huge problem. It's the same thing I've got with like oil companies looking to invest in green technologies. Well, like you can take a look at Shell. Shell isn't doing a whole lot of investment, but they're buying up a lot of companies. That to me doesn't speak of a petroleum oil company really taking energy seriously. It's, well, we can kind of now dictate the course of these green technologies and still make sure that our oil is selling well. And we could put the onus in the primary focus on oil. I'm super skeptical about those types of business moves and shenanigans. But anyway, so that's Ford. Bear Paw 34, I used to like Nissan until I had two in a row break down. I'm sorry to hear that. I've had pretty good experiences with the Versa and the Sentra, so we're doing okay there, knock on wood, that they're reasonably priced vehicles with good maintenance and good support that will last us a while. But this is also the thing, like my wife and I are having these conversations about what cars we're going to drive, and we just have zero faith that any automobile we purchase is going to last as long as the kinds of cars that my parents used to drive. My mom has a Toyota Camry that I think is going on 15 years, maybe longer. I seriously doubt that any car we buy today will last, I don't know, more than 5 years past paying it off on a 2-year loan. Like this isn't exciting anymore. I used to be that kid that would rip open the guts of little four-cylinder Hondas and bolt-on turbos and like port and polish cylinder heads, and I was really good at like brake jobs and suspension upgrades and stuff. And I just don't see. Wow, it just got really windy. My window's rattling over there. I just don't really see any kind of excitement in that space outside of now moving over into a new tech like electric vehicles. So that's kind of the bummer. Ricky Fox Tech, my mom has a Ford Excursion from 2000, just had it painted, and it has more than 275,000 miles on it. See, that's exactly what I'm talking about. And it's not like even the 90s to the early 2000s, we were making such amazing vehicles. I just kind of feel like the whole market of planned obsolescence is hitting all of us as consumers harder in pretty much all sectors: tech, automobiles, electronics, appliances. Everything feels like, you could just like poke it with a stick and watch it fall apart after a year of being used. But anyway, I digress. I want to get to some other tech news. From Gansy Tech Nerd, I wanted to ask about Master and Commander as well. Save that for the end, because tonight we're going to be broadcasting the Geek Book Club with my buddy Andrew Wallace. We're going to be talking about that book later tonight, and that'll be another live stream on this channel. So, shifting gears, this is going to have some WAN and politics. Let me get this queued up here. So, joining the Netherlands, now Belgium declares loot boxes gambling and therefore illegal. This is coming from Eurogamer. Not the most exciting look for an article, but the Belgian Gaming Commission looked at Star Wars Battlefront 2, FIFA 18, Overwatch, and Counter-Strike Global Offensive, and found only Star Wars was not in violation of the country's gambling legislation, and that's only because EA stripped out the game's loot boxes after the launch debacle before this investigation took place. So even the one that surprised me was Overwatch. So even the loot box situation, or the crate situation in Overwatch, was deemed gambling. And this is something that I've been super passionate about of late. I am very upset with the current gaming trend of building in a ton of grind, not really improving game mechanics, and then withholding game upgrades from the player until resources and time are pumped through some kind of random number generating event in the game. I've been talking a lot about some of my favorite mobile games, things like Marvel Future Fight, where you spend weeks accruing resources, in-game currency, in-game materials. They keep adding. So there was just a major update for Marvel Future Fight, and they added 4 more new types of materials to rank up your character to another power tier. And I'm still casually joining this game, but about half of my alliance, the little guild that I play in online, has just disappeared. And I don't blame them. This is not fun anymore. It's just so you work a long time to build up this material, and then you go to upgrade your character, and it's not like, well, you get 1,000 of these crystals and then your character is more powerful. It's you get 1,000 of these crystals, and then a random number generator will determine how much of the upgrade you've just succeeded at, and it just throws those crystals away, and then you have to accrue more crystals. You don't know how much it's going to cost you to upgrade your character. And so any type of system like that, I think, should be heavily scrutinized by the gaming industry. The ESRB is not weighing in on gambling mechanics in video games. And if the ESRB is not going to consider that type of gaming mechanic in a game as part of the ratings, because, you know, like, if you want to make a gambling mechanic in a game, then make it for adults. This is the same thing we do in Vegas. You know, if you go to a slot machine, you pull the lever, you should be 21 or older, especially because they serve alcohol on the game floor. So make this a game that's rated adults only. You know, if you want the gambling mechanic in there, make it for adults. And also, let's not abuse family franchises. Let's not abuse, you know, what Disney controls. So, because this isn't coming from just EA. This isn't a problem I have. EA has been one of the worst proponents of this. But, you know, my Marvel Future Fight game comes from a company named Netmarble, which has been going through a ton of legal issues over hijinky game mechanics in other countries, on other properties. But Disney is complicit because they have to sign off on how their franchises are being used. So Disney seems fine with burning materials and introducing slot machine random number generated events in games directed at kids. And that I'm not okay with. And if the gaming industry can't police itself, then unfortunately politicians need to get involved. And if politicians get involved, we're all going to be really upset about this, because politicians do a terrible job of handling media and entertainment. Every single time that we've seen some kind of influence of the government over media, over movies, over music, over comic books, it's been terrible for that art form. So again, I'm begging and pleading and trying to get everyone I know involved. Like, parents need to know what's going on with the games their kids play. This is definitely not an excuse to reduce personal responsibility, but there's so much out there, and there's so many problems with the current state of gaming. I can't expect all parents to be experts in all games before their kids play them. And we're supposed to have resources for parents like game ratings, the ESRB. Is this game good for teens? Is it all ages? Is it, adults only? That should be the situation. And there have been some little glowing positive steps in that direction. A Spider-Man title coming out with no loot box or progression microtransaction situations involved. From Fat Produce, I figure a game like Overwatch should just remove the ability to buy loot boxes, since in that particular game, loot boxes are purely cosmetic. They would be fine. And again, I would love to say, so many games have done well with cosmetic microtransactions. I'm not saying get rid of microtransactions. If you want a bacon-wrapped gun and you want to pay $3, $5, $10 of real-world currency to go and get that gun, I say go for it. My problem is when you've got a random number generating event, because it's designed to create frustration and then release. It's just like, when is this slot machine going to pay out? I'm upset. It finally pays out. Oh, I feel so relieved. And that dopamine hit keeps you locked into the random aspect of that behavior, the random aspect of that mechanic. And that is what needs to go. And also, I think it's lazy. I think any developer who's making a game and putting up these artificial paywall restrictions for the things you want, even if it's not like I can't progress through the story mode or I can't get the gun I want, even if it's just like, I just want to improve the look of my character's armor, I just want to have a different hat, even that sounds like something is a mechanic that I think unfairly targets some of the most vulnerable members of our gaming community, be they children or be they whales who are spending way too much money on unnecessary affectation in these games. But that's also why it works, is because it's ridiculously profitable for these companies. If you look at EA's earnings reports, the amount of money that they're making off of these microtransaction and loot box mechanics is staggering. It's so much more than what other game developers are making just selling the game. But we can't be beholden just to whether or not shareholders are happy. This is also an artistic and collaborative art form. This is something that is creative. It's a creative endeavor. And so just like movies, we need to be able to examine certain behaviors and police internally before this control is taken out of our hands. If they're reluctant to do this, then EA needs to get burned by some kind of regulatory agency. From Sharil Abdul Rahman, I keep pronouncing your last name wrong. The dopamine hit sounds like someone getting lucky, LOL. Again, you're not wrong, because it's all just random number generating. So you do, in essence, get lucky on one pull of the slot machine, and it feels really good. And then some people are going to be upset if you just put a price tag on stuff. So let's say in-game currency, we say it's going to cost 10 million gold, but you could put 50,000 gold towards one pull in a lottery-style slot machine and have a 0.2% chance of rolling what you want. If you get that roll, it feels amazing. But in the long term, you're going to burn way more in-game currency than the times you'll get lucky. Trust me, unfortunately, I know way too much about this in terms of mobile games. So, speaking of money, and speaking of paying money and looking at Europeans pissed off about companies who aren't paying the money that they think they should, another story about Apple maybe or maybe not paying their taxes in Ireland. So this is a story that started back in 2016. We're talking about 13 billion euro that the EU is examining Apple in terms of their tax bill and tax liability. Excuse me, I got to drink a little coffee here. Hold on one second. A little SomeGadgetGuy ASMR there. 13 billion euro. Now, 2 years later, on this back tax judgment, we are looking at Apple potentially having to pay because European Commission investigators have been making this claim, but they're saying that Apple has been benefiting from an illegal tax structure in Ireland. Again, we've got a lot of comments. This is from Apple CEO Tim Cook, and this was in the 2016 letter. We now find ourselves in the unusual position of being ordered to retroactively pay additional taxes to a government that says we don't owe them any more than we've already paid. But Ireland might be giving unfair preferential treatment to Apple to allow for them not to have to pay as much in taxes, and that's what the EU is investigating. This is a company that is very frustrating to report on and is very frustrating because I recommend their products to a lot of my family and friends. I do not personally enjoy using Apple products. I'm not an iOS fan. I'm not a Mac OS fan, and I'm a hardware junkie. So I want stuff that Apple literally can and will not sell to me. But when we look at how they do business in other markets, when we look at their liability, when we look at the insane hoops they will jump to prevent themselves from having to pay what reasonably should be part of their tax bill, even in these other countries. So they moved their international offices to Ireland because Ireland was already giving them a great tax savings. And then they're still playing financial tricks with how much they owe in Europe in terms of taxes. And they're putting this process through years of legal wrangling because as much as this story has now come out saying they have to pay 13 billion euro, they're still going to be appealing it. So it's not even they have to pay this. We're talking about a company that I think is sitting on almost $300 billion in liquid. They've got this huge stockpile of cash, and for what? Here in the United States, they kept making the claim that they were paying their appropriate tax bill. The United States does have a pretty crappy process for overseas business in repatriating cash. I don't think anyone disagrees with that. But Apple essentially sat on this cash until the Trump administration was in power to not have to repatriate this money and not have to pay what their bill was. Only a company like Apple could get away with this. Again, Apple has reached one of these too big to fail sweetheart stories. It's a lifestyle brand that people identify with and think is really nifty and really cool. So it gets really emotional. If you try and go after Apple as a company, you're going to have a ton of people that are going to be upset about this. And they can always sort of rankle their bases by saying, oh, the government's coming after us, or government. And then you're going to have a bunch of angry people stomping and crying and gnashing of teeth. So this is one of those things that gets me really upset because Apple seems to be able to blackmail countries into doing business with them in a way that isn't really fair to the resources, to the tax burden, and to the locales that they do business in. So this is another one. I'd be curious to hear your guys' thoughts on this because I bet Apple's able to weasel out of a good chunk of this. We've been talking about 13 billion euro since 2016, and I doubt that Apple's going to be on the hook for interest. If I were doing business in Europe as a small, little company, and I didn't pay my tax burden, and they came after me and forced me to pay my taxes, I would probably also be on the hook for insurance on the on interest on the amount of money that I'm owing them. So it's a frustrating turn of events that, again, even in settling this bill, Apple will probably get preferential treatment over other businesses who are stuck in similar situations. The fact that our government capitulated and they were able to sit on their money in offshore accounts, they were able to loan to get money on loans in the United States to pay back their shareholders, and then they were able to repatriate cash on essentially a tax holiday after not paying their taxes anyway. Our taxes are too high. Well, you're not paying your taxes. I know, so we're not going to keep not paying our taxes. Oh, well, we better be nice to you then, is a ridiculous turn of events. This is from Gansey Tech Nerd. I personally believe Apple benefiting from Ireland is somewhat similar to states in the U.S. trying to lure Amazon into setting up their headquarters in their states by offering to waive their taxes. Again, I completely agree with you, Gansey. This is an ugly turn of events in which we're arriving at a lowest common denominator giveaway. These benefits to insanely profitable, humongous corporations, which are already sort of winning in their respective industries. Why are we dumping so much money into their pockets as opposed to promoting growth, promoting competition, and putting money towards sectors that would actually viably create more jobs? So that to me becomes the biggest non sequitur of this. Is we're talking about local, city, and state governments that are having to cut education, having to cut first responders, having to cut infrastructure. Where's the money coming in that supposedly having this business in your location is going to benefit the community? And it doesn't. It doesn't ever seem to benefit the community. And we've been playing this game since the Reagan administration. From Sherrill, it is also a bit of the Apple name power. The country can say the biggest name in the tech industry is doing business in their country. That's a bragging point against other countries. It's the same thing. From Peter Ford, Trump and taxes. Taxes, not me. That's for poor people. See, you don't pay your taxes. That means you're smart. So don't contribute to, infrastructure. Don't contribute to healthcare. Don't contribute to education. Don't contribute to the military. Just don't pay into all of that. You don't need to support those benefits of doing business in this country, having the best military in the world, having access to an educated workforce, having access to roads that aren't crumbling out from underneath you. Apple did it all by themselves, just picked themselves up by their own bootstraps, and doesn't need to contribute to supporting any of the stuff that makes it profitable and beneficial for them to do business in the United States. I remember visiting Ireland back when their economy started having troubles. I tried my best to stimulate their economy with my liver. Oh, Andrew, you're adorable. I don't know that I could ever, I love Irish whiskey. I do. I don't think I could ever drink enough to have any kind of impact on, how much better the Irish are at drinking than I am. So yeah, that's kind of a bummer. But, going back to Sherrill's point about like bragging rights, who wants bragging rights? This is like the most frustrating aspect of like doing business online. It's kind of like saying, oh, think of all the great exposure you'll get. Well, roads aren't paid for by exposure and imaginary internet points. Like if you're an artist and someone commissions you and tries to get work for you for free, having exposure doesn't put food on your table or a roof over your head. So this is a terrible state of affairs that we find ourselves with regulatory agencies and governments who are woefully ill-equipped to actually rein in corporate power and infrastructure. Peter Ford, I've been skeptical of Apple since finding out their parts and phones weren't made in the U.S. after bragging about being American products. Yeah, it's been a long, strange road between me and Apple. I used to be an Apple product specialist when I was working on a government contract. I used to manage an account for DOE facilities in New Mexico, and I was probably the biggest advocate for Apple. This was back like the original IBM PowerPC G5s. This was Xserves. This was their LightPipe was just coming into the market, and these RAID arrays that you could build on Apple products. We were building these like supercomputer rigs using Xserves. It was a really exciting time getting your hands in the guts of Macs, and they were a lot more exciting than PCs back then. And it just seemed like every major iteration of Apple post that time for me was them taking a step away from something I cared about, cheaping out on different parts. They made the switch to Intel and then managed to screw that up on numerous generations of MacBook. It was just it's been a consistent bummer watching them become just a consumer-facing, shiny widget selling company. Again, whatever we might claim in Apple in terms of innovation with a product quality that they used to make, they aren't that company anymore. And I think that's very much reflected in how amazing Tim Cook is as a CEO for generating value for shareholders, but not necessarily for generating exciting products. Excuse me. From RGB Plaza, found myself the perfect thing to listen to whilst doing my revisions for exams. Hopefully I don't put you to sleep while you're revising your exams. From Sharil, in this case, the bragging rights are more towards getting in foreign investments from the outside. It's like saying, hey, I have Justin Bieber as my CEO. Come invest. I don't know that anyone would want to invest with Bieber as the CEO, but that's also part of the problem, is you go out and you say, hey, look, we've got Apple doing business in our country. Every company that you're looking to try and court is going to say, well, what deal did you give Apple? Well, we also want preferential treatment for our taxes and our tax burden too. So again, you keep drawing in all of these companies to use your resources, to occupy your workforce, to benefit from your preferential treatment. And then what do you get out of it? Are they really spending enough money in your state to offset, not only offset the tax vacuum that you've created, but then improve your country's infrastructure on top of that? And I think we've seen from numerous experiments here in the United States that never seems to pan out. More burden gets placed on your citizenry, more burden gets placed on the middle class, and those companies then get to use that as leverage. Oh, well, if you're going to make us pay more in taxes now that we're here, we'll just take our business somewhere else. Again, look at, like, Trump campaigned on this, and, you know, jobs still, like, you know, Carrier, was it Carrier, the manufacturer there? Basically every industry that he promised he would keep jobs in the United States, those jobs have evaporated. He's created like 10 jobs in clean coal because that stuff doesn't really exist. From RGB Plaza, what do you think of the new update to Microsoft Launcher for Android? I have not played with it yet. I'll give it a shot, but I'm such a Nova kid that it takes a lot for me to spend any time and go with that. From Sharil, sadly, the improvements and benefits will go to the few, and yes, that sucks big time. I don't want to turn this into a political rant, but it is one of those things, like, I desperately do not want to get to a point where we're seriously entertaining a significant pendulum swing back towards, like, more authoritarian socialist behavior, because I would like to make money for, you know, doing my job and stuff. So it's again, if I were a shareholder at Apple, I'd be very concerned over the state of the market in not playing nice with some of these problems internationally and domestically in terms of tax burdens, because eventually you stop shearing sheep and you start skinning them. So I want to move on. Let's switch gears because I'm getting all cranky and edgy about it. Some disappointing news coming from Intel, but that might actually, again, help the state of competition for high technology products. Intel delays its 10 nanometer Cannon Lake CPUs yet again. So, a very disappointing story, which broke last week. If you're looking at PC building, gaming PCs, cool tech hardware, we got some great news from AMD. Ryzen 2 from AMD is performing very well. Modest spec bumps, but again, an overall platform shift towards refining what was already a great CPU. We've been waiting for Intel to shrink their process for their next generation CPUs, but we've been stuck at one process, I think, for 3 years now, maybe almost 4. And Intel used to lead the way in this change. So one of the things that we're talking about here, when we talk about 10 nanometer, 14 nanometer, 7 nanometer, the smaller you make a chip, the more efficiently it can run. It's literally, we're talking about a fraction of a measurement of the human hair, nanometers of distance between these little transistors, how the electricity moves from gate to gate to gate, and how you route information through this process improves significantly when we start making things smaller and smaller and smaller. We make something too small, then that chip won't do a good job of efficiently moving electricity through these different little parts and pieces. So it's been this process race of how many transistors can we pack in a certain surface area, and for the longest time, Intel has dominated in this space. Their manufacturing, their capacity, their process shifts have been unbeatable, extremely formidable. Well, as we've been going through some of the process changes pre-Spectre and Meltdown, the major bugs that hit all CPUs in terms of security, in trying to ramp up to improve performance, Intel seems to have gotten stuck at 14 nanometers and has had a difficult time pushing into 10. So over the last year, other chip fabricators, Samsung and TSMC, have started pushing into 10 nanometer with a process which probably won't be as sophisticated as Intel's 10 nanometer. But Intel's 10 nanometer has been broken for so long that by the time their 10 nanometer chips are set to arrive, Samsung and TSMC could be pushing into 8 and 7 nanometer. So even if Intel's 10 nanometer is more sophisticated, is more efficient, is offers better performance, that might be eaten up by the process shifting going even smaller from Samsung and TSMC. At the same time, AMD does not have the same incredible catalog of components that they need to work on. They make CPUs and GPUs. They don't have, Intel makes a ton of stuff. So when it comes to allocating resources, we know that Intel is really jumping on trying to fix their problem. 10 nanometer is not producing at yield. So it costs a lot more. So you saw that picture, the giant wafer. This giant circle of material. Each one of those is going to be a tiny little CPU that pops off the wafer. But because of the way that this is all printed, because of the way that this is all assembled, not all of these will be viable, purchasable CPUs. So right now, their yield is woefully low. So they have to waste a lot of material and waste a lot of manufacturing and a lot of printing to get a few pieces which are actually going to be consumer viable. While Intel is working on this, AMD is dedicating all of their resources towards their next gen shift, and we're looking at, for 2019 and into 2020, AMD Ryzen 3. We're already seeing a pipeline, a channel where Ryzen 3 could be on a 7 nanometer process around the same time that Intel delivers 10 nanometer chips. Excuse me, I'm gonna drink some water. So Intel's getting hammered by mobile chipsets. They don't have a strong place in smartphones and tablets, wearables, things like that. Their current process for how dominant they are in desktop and laptop CPUs is eroding because of this process change, and they're seeing significant competition coming from other fabricators, TSMC, Samsung, and their main rival, AMD, is starting to get ahead of them, and we haven't seen that happen for a really long time. I wouldn't say AMD CPUs have ever been ahead of Intel since... Well, Thunderbird, I would say they reached parity, but it was Athlon way back in the day when we first saw the very first desktop CPUs that had dual core, had 2 CPU cores built on one chip. That I would say was probably the only time AMD ever cut ahead of Intel. And it wasn't necessarily because Intel products were less sophisticated. It was that they made a bet on Pentium 4 and ramping up clock speeds that didn't work. And AMD worked more on efficiency and work per clock cycle, and that worked. But immediately, like with Core 2, Intel caught up and then beat them, I think, like 2 years afterwards. So again, it's exceedingly rare when Intel is ever in a position to be fighting from behind or playing catch up. And now we've been seeing them stuck on this for years to try and move up in that market. At the same time, I'm looking at rebuilding my PC, hopefully after Computex, and I'm very curious to see if we get a refresh on Threadripper. Because of some of the shenanigans befalling like NVIDIA and their GeForce Partner program, I might go with an AMD GPU just to put my money where my mouth is, to vote with my wallet. So we'll have to see. I mean, this could be a really exciting time for system builders having some really solid competition in this space from companies that are starting to build a process lead against Intel. Excuse me. Let me scroll back because I saw a lot of cost on this. Let me see. From R81 365, I have not talked about Sprint and T-Mobile yet. We'll be getting to that later. From Fat Produce, speaking of PC building, any teases for this week's Newegg now? I have already forgotten what we're going to be talking about this week on Newegg now. We don't have a script yet. We usually get our script Tuesday. It gets refined Wednesday so that I can read up on Wednesday to be well-versed on Thursday when we broadcast. But I don't think we're going to have anything too heavy for GPUs. We had a 1070 and a 1080 last week. But that's also one of the stories that we've got coming up here in just a little bit is GPU pricing. From Ganzi Technerd, what about the Coffee Lake CPUs with a decent 6-core spec? Won't that be in demand for another 2 years before the Cannon Lake can be perfected to replace Coffee Lake? So Intel codenames have these lakes, Coffee Lake, Cannon Lake. I forget what the current one is. Yeah, I should have this stuff memorized. But anyway, when we're talking about these different process shifts, Intel has managed, again, Intel's manufacturing is more sophisticated than competitors when we're talking about comparable die shrink sizes. It's not apples to apples. An Intel 14 nanometer part will typically perform better than a competitor's 14 nanometer part, TSMC. Again, Intel is a juggernaut for a reason. Only in part has been some of their shenanigans when it comes to unfair business practices. Again, legal stuff, we don't have to go down that rabbit hole again in this podcast. But what Intel has done is actually should be commended. Being stuck on 14 nanometers so long, they have refined their 14 nanometer parts to perform substantially better than their first batch of 14 nanometer chips. Depending on what benchmarks you go off of, and from the reading that I've done, from the early days of chip fabrication at 14 nanometer to today, we've been seeing something around a 50%, I want to say a 50% improvement in performance for the end consumer, and something like a 70% improvement in yield, which also means that Intel can make more money per chip and there's less waste in the actual manufacturing process. So all of this should be commended, but now they've been stuck so long that even for as sophisticated as their parts are, die shrinks from other companies should make up the difference in sophistication, and further die shrinks from companies, again, Intel at 14 nanometers, just as AMD goes down to 7, should be a significant advantage for AMD that Intel might not be able to completely catch up on going down to 10. And that's where this is getting really exciting, because this is an arms race. This is a real fight. And we haven't had a real fight in a long time. From Fat Produce, I'm still sore about Intel abandoning the mobile chipset market. Yeah, I mean, missing out on X-Scale and Atom processors. And they missed the boat. The market is going mobile, and we're seeing some really good stuff coming for consumers. Lower power chipsets, LTE connectivity, running Windows on ARM. All of this stuff could be really disruptive to Intel's core business. From Cheryl, I also have to say that the Ryzen 2 and the Ryzen 2000 series are very good value chips based on reviews I've seen online. The 2700X looks like a baller CPU. I still want to do Threadripper. I want that crazy core count not for gaming. I don't think it's a very good chipset for gaming price to performance, but it looks very exciting for video editing and rendering. Let me see. From Peter Ford, I'm sure a ton of R&D goes into development. Supposedly another reason Apple has been in the lead with their processors. That's actually one thing that Apple has been doing really well. And it's not just that the A-series processors that they use in the iPhone and the iPad are so much better. It's that they control the entire pipeline. If Intel could control from soup to nuts the development, design, application, installation,
and then the software development that goes hand in hand with that chipset, then I think we would see insane gains from Intel processors in the actual consumer experience. And that's one of the major benefits that Apple has with the A series processors over Qualcomm with Snapdragon processors, the chipsets that are most often found in Android phones. Is you've got a Linux kernel with Google stuff on top, then often a manufacturer skin, and then running a little pocketed environment for applications to run in is not nearly as efficient and is not nearly as cohesive an environment as iOS is for the iPhone. So that's often why we'll see. It's like benchmarking doesn't really count, but that's why when you try and run comparable programs against each other in Android land versus iOS land, that the A-series processors always seem to have at least one full generation advantage over Android. That being said, most consumers never scratch the surface of what Qualcomm has to offer, let alone what the A-series chipset can actually do in your iPhone. From Ari Kawasara, Jim Keller is joining Intel. Will it help? I would totally recommend anyone who's watching this who is kind of into tech but isn't like really deep in the weeds on this kind of stuff, go look up Jim Keller. That dude is awesome. Jim Keller joining Intel to try and help make up some of the deficit on this manufacturing, I think could be a really exciting move, could be a really killer move. So I think that's definitely a step in the right direction, that Intel is taking this deficit seriously. Bringing someone like Keller on, again, I don't want to go down this dude's resume. I just look him up. He's an awesome asset, and this could be, again, a step in the right direction towards Intel making up some of that gap. Talking about Apple and processors, will we see a new ARM-based desktop design with their own chips again? From Sharil. I think this kind of news is probably another reason why we've been seeing so many rumors about Apple trying to get away from Intel for their desktop and laptop processors. We were talking about this on Board at Works podcast. It's something that I really hope Apple does. So we've been seeing these rumors about a low-cost MacBook, and I think that would be a bad move. I think the MacBook name should exist as their premium line. You've got the Mac Pro, you've got the MacBook, but below the Mac Pro, you've got the iMac. I think with how crazy into nostalgic marketing we are, we should totally revive the iBook. If I were at Apple right now, and they didn't ask me, so I'm giving them a ton of free consulting here, look at creating an iOS mobile computing platform in a more traditional clamshell laptop form factor. So I think Apple was too early to calling an iPad an iPad Pro because the apps weren't really there to support what the iPad Pro could do. So it's kind of a chicken and the egg. You need more powerful, more professional grade hardware, but I don't think the tablet was necessarily the right place to do it. Make sort of a modular clambook, pen touch supporting $500 to $600 laptop, but it's running iOS. You still have access to a ton of really great application software, Microsoft services, cloud-based services, design services. Adobe is supporting a lot of this stuff. You've got video editors and better cameras and all this stuff that you could do in the iOS space, but put it into a laptop shell. So you've got macOS and MacBook. You've got iOS and iBook, and I think people will take that product more seriously, which then helps that transition into Apple potentially merging iOS and macOS. I think 2 years of that strategy, of that brand, and Apple could probably unseat Surface in the minds of a lot of consumers for being the cool, hip, modular laptop design. I want a tablet, I want a laptop, I want 2-in-1, I can do flippy, foldy things with it, there's the Surface Book, all of that stuff. I think Apple, even though they're late, they're always late to the market, I think Apple could do that really well and then run the table with that kind of a product strategy for a lot of consumers, especially because you could, even with Apple's Apple tax, even with the profit margin that Apple builds into their products, attaching a larger battery and a keyboard to an iPad should still mean you could come in under the price of a well-spec'd Surface Pro. You should be able to beat it by at least $100 with the keyboard built in and a stylus. That should be easy. That shouldn't be a difficult thing for Apple to do and still have a ton of profit built into that machine. I've got a ton of comments here, right? So I'm gonna scroll back down from RGB Plaza. I want Windows Phone back. We all do. From Sherrill, iPad Surface, or call it the iBook. iBook was their brand name. I'm just saying, we're right there, totally. From Ganzi Tech Nerd, talking about tech competition, BW1's poster for 90210, the tech years, kind of reminded me of all the characters in that poster representing the 90s tech companies that are giants today. Hold on, let me pull this up. So BW1 made this. There was this hashtag going on, old headshot. So I studied to be an actor, and I had headshots done. My first headshot is terrible. But hold on, I'm going to make this bigger too. I'm going to zoom in on this. Sorry for those of you listening, but I'll add a link to the show notes. Oh, no, dang it. I'll add a link to the show notes so that you guys can see it too. So Bored at Work shared this, but BW1 made it. And this is Beverly Hills 90210, the tech years. And it's kind of perfect. It absolutely is. All of us as youngins, and I think most of us are actually 90s kids, or at least, born sometime in the 80s-ish, growing up throughout the 90s-ish. But there's Bored at Work. There's Warren. He actually made it, BW1. There's Sherrill. Super Saf, not Sherrill. Sherrill was the one who mentioned it in my comments right now. There's Trisha Hirschberger, and she's adorable. But Super Totes most adorable. There's Mr. Mobile. Check out that spiky hair. I love it. And then me at the bottom. For some reason, me and Saf got the little windows, but I'm rocking my left ear only hoop earring. So yeah, that was epically funny. And I really appreciate it. A lot of people went out to say, oh, well, you don't look terrible in your headshot. The headshot's actually a decent portrait of me, but it's a terrible headshot. Like, I used to send that out to try and go on auditions and stuff. And no big surprise looking back on that now as a more sophisticated, having worked in casting in Hollywood, no big surprise that I didn't get a lot of callbacks for sending out that headshot. So yeah, funny stuff. I want to get into some more political news and some disappointing stuff from major tech companies. We are looking at yet another price-fixing scandal. This is coming from Samsung, Micron, and Hynix. These three companies represent 90, or it's here in the article. This is from AppleInsider.com. 96% of the RAM market is fulfilled by Samsung, Hynix, and Micron. They are currently now under investigation for colluding to work together so that they could artificially inflate the price of RAM. If they did this in the dumbest way possible, because over 2017, we saw RAM prices, consumer RAM prices, jump 47% in 1 year, the largest jump in RAM pricing in 30 years. Short-term financial gain, mega corporations, dumb outcome. Don't do this. Lobster pot. You had this. If these three companies colluded, worked together to restrict supply, to artificially increase demand, causing prices to rise, they could have done that in a slower ramp. In 1 year, jacking up prices almost 50% is the dumbest thing you can do if you expect no one to notice. So this is what gets so frustrating about covering some of these companies. Samsung's a humongous collection of organizations. So it's not that Samsung, the same Samsung that makes your Galaxy phone is the same Samsung that makes your TVs, is the same Samsung that makes RAM and solid state drives. But what we've also seen is where we don't have only this trio of companies representing almost 100% of the market, the similar manufacturing processes are used in things like solid state drives. Samsung solid state drives are baller. Their SSDs are great, but SSD prices haven't been on the same tear. SSD prices are actually dropping because of the different pockets of demand and the different competition in this space, the different suppliers who are also offering these types of solutions. So there really isn't, as far as what I can see, and again, someone who's more educated as to the nuances of this type of fabrication and manufacturing, please correct me. But when I see, die shrinks and manufacturing improvements on SSDs, I know that's not the same technology as what goes into RAM, but it would seem to me that coming from the same semiconductor house, that those improvements would go hand in hand, that DDR4, that the current RAM that we use in our phones, in our tablets, in our laptops, in our desktops, would be getting cheaper with improvements to manufacturing process, would be getting less expensive with 3 huge companies all working to improve their products. There doesn't seem to me to be any reasonable explanation for why this stuff would be getting more expensive throughout this part of the timetable, and it doesn't line up with like the current artificially inflated prices for graphics cards because of crypto mining. That doesn't, to me, go hand in hand in the same linear fashion, that because a bunch of people are building ASIC rigs and then also GPU multi-rendering crypto rigs, that would be causing GPU prices to rise. Because we know that's artificial speculation in that market because of the current fad of trying to mine Bitcoin and Ethereum. That doesn't go the same linear relationship with RAM. It doesn't seem to me that would work the same way. So, again, I would be very curious to see if someone else that there has an explanation for what I might be missing or what Apple Insider might be missing. But we see that there is an actual lawsuit. There's a class action lawsuit in place. I'll, in the link that I'll have under the show notes from appleinsider.com, they actually have the full complaint. So it's being filed in the Northern District of California. And I believe the party responsible for enacting the class action is the same. Hold on. It might be the same attorneys that did this back in 2006. So here's what's frustrating. So in 2006, a class action lawsuit achieved a $300 million settlement for people who had purchased any products with artificially inflated prices on RAM. So this isn't even the first time that these companies have engaged in anti-consumer business practices to increase profitability on things like RAM. Then there was a Department of Justice case which levied $730 million in criminal fines. And between all of the companies involved, I believe the focus of the DOJ response was Samsung and Hynix. Employees of Samsung and Hynix spent a collected 3,185 days in jail because of the Department of Justice. So you take 1,600 employees from Samsung and Hynix, and they all spend 2 days in jail, justice served. I have no idea if that's actually the case. But between Samsung and Hynix, between the class action settlement and DOJ fines, they got hit for just over $1 billion. I know it's not the case where they probably split that evenly, but let's say Samsung and Hynix both paid out half of that settlement, $500 million per company. This brings me to my next article. This is completely unrelated in terms of who's doing the reporting. This is coming from ZDNet. Samsung's memory business leads record Q1 profits in 2018. In one quarter, Samsung Electronics posted a record operating profit of 15.64 trillion won, the currency that they trade in South Korea. And hold on, let's pull this up here. where is the... Okay, the all-time high, a rise of 58% from a year ago, was propelled by its semiconductor business, especially in memory, in DRAM chips, that I added that, which contributed 11.55 trillion won. So Samsung Electronics posted profits of 15.64 trillion won, and 11.5 trillion of that came from their semiconductor business, with a major focus on memory. And over a year ago, again, the same time frame that we saw the potential collusion between Samsung, Micron, and Hynix, 58% increase. The first quarter is conventionally an off-season for memory chips, but high demand from servers and graphics led the growth, the company said. So the server business took off a whole bunch. Not related in the slightest to the fact that we jacked up the price 50%. Oh, no. That doesn't account for a 50% improvement to our company's quarterly financials year over year. So how much is 11.55 trillion won? Right now, if I'm doing the Google converter currencies online, that roughly translates to $10.8 billion. So let's take this back. In 2006, there was an overall $1 billion penalty for engaging in this type of unfair business practice, this anti-consumer business practice, of which Samsung, let's say they paid half, $500 million. If that were to be enacted today, let's say we doubled it so that there was a $2 billion penalty, we would still only be at 10% of the profit from this business practice. That, to me, sounds like a perfectly fine slap on the wrist to weather when your company is making $10.8 billion and you might have to lose $1 billion out of that. Again, that doesn't account for the 58% difference. That penalty does nothing to dissuade Samsung from participating in a similar pattern of behavior after, of course, the ire has died down, after, of course, the spotlight is off them. Just go back to doing it again, because we made so much money. Our shareholders are so happy that that's exactly why, we can just go back and do all of this crazy stuff again. If this happens to go down again and we don't see some kind of significant penalty, real jail time for collaborators and colluders, and some type of market shift, some type of market correction which actually dissuades them from doing business this way, get used to paying more for your electronics, get used to paying more for your computer parts than you otherwise would need to in a market that had healthy competition. That's ridiculous. At some point we need to say, like, you engaged in this business practice to the tune of a 50% increase. We need to take the profits generated from that and apply that towards not letting this happen again. But of course, that's a really unpopular sentiment to share. So, Peter Ford, that's why I get so pissed when they charge so much for their products, when they have billions in reserve for what? Paying fines? And again, they don't need billions in reserve for paying fines. We're likely talking about hundreds of millions in reserve for paying the fines. The rest of that just gets, lumped back into their quarterly profits. From Renovatio? From Reno. I'm going to shorten your name to Reno. Apologies. We don't have class action here in Europe, but if this case succeeds in the U.S., expect the EU Commission to attack. They will all be screwed. That's actually where I have the most hope for enacting some kind of change in behavior. I seriously doubt the United States Department of Justice is going to do anything which is going to upset Samsung in the slightest. They'll gnash their teeth and wail and swoon and the vapors of they charged us $700 million to pay these penalties. We've totally learned our lesson. I do actually think the EU Commission will probably do a better job of tackling this. Again, EU seems to be doing a better job of handling tech right now. From Gabaletta, if found guilty, they should give up any profit towards the settlement. And I agree. I actually think that would move the needle a lot on these companies not engaging in these types of anti-consumer business practices. I think we've got pretty clear numbers, pretty clear indication when we see an almost 50% rise in the price of these parts, and then we see an almost 60% rise in the profits of these parts. Then let's whittle that down. We can say 10% of the profit actually came from Samsung doing business in a responsible way, but the other 50% of that profit rise, that needs to go back to the settlement. And that would be a significant chunk of change that would convince Samsung to change how they do business in this regard. Just super frustrating. Again, after leaving being a huge Apple advocate, you can actually go back and see some of my early tech videos. I was a big Samsung fan. I did really well with Samsung. It's how I met and became friends with Trisha Hirschberger, because she used to work for Samsung. She was a really well-educated product rep on their lineups, and then she shifted over into doing her own tech commentary, tech videos, and that's how we became pals. And, we were Samsung pals for a long time, talking about Galaxy Active phones and Notes and just how exciting these product lineups were. And increasingly, it's like why you don't want to be a fan of these companies, because they're major corporations. They're not our friends. They exist to provide value for shareholders, and they wrap that up in a lot of feel-good marketing. So we feel like we're on Team Samsung, and it taps into that tribalism. And then they pull a move like this, and now there's a discord. There's a disconnect between the company I like and the company whose products sort of contribute to my display of my lifestyle and business practices that I violently disagree with. We got to let that go. We've got to separate that from being fans of tech, and then also holding companies accountable for their actual liability and their actual commitments to citizenry. And that's where we get stuck again. I went down political again. Apologize. Back off the soapboxing, because we also have to go political one more time. So this was sort of late in the week. I think the headlines dropped while I was at Newegg. This is Huawei. We're coming back to Huawei. Criminal investigation over possible violation of Iran sanctions. So this is the Reddit post where the actual, this is from the Wall Street Journal. I'll go ahead and click on the Wall Street Journal just to get the headline and the logo up. The Justice Department is investigating whether Huawei Technologies company violated U.S. sanctions related to Iran, according to people familiar with the matter, a move that opens a new avenue of scrutiny of the Chinese cellular electronics giant on national security grounds. So it's from Adita. Juan, were you able to follow up on the Linus iMac issues? Ask me that again at the end of the podcast, because I do have some thoughts on the Linus iMac situation. But talking about Huawei again, Justice Department, it's unclear how far the Justice Department probe has advanced and what specific allegation federal agents are probing. So I have been fairly outspoken, not necessarily in support of Huawei, but in being skeptical about the previous round of law enforcement advisories surrounding Huawei and ZTE. When our government is going out of their way to claim some potential harm to consumers, but not detailing any evidence, and people who are far better at cracking open these devices and analyzing the content, the information that's being sent from these devices, can't find anything wrong, or can't find any significant holes in security or significant gaps in consumer protections, that makes me very skeptical of why our government was so forceful in its advisory against those products when they've been completely silent on other manufacturers and other Chinese manufacturers who are currently having problems with protecting consumer information and consumer financial information. That makes me very skeptical as to what the true motives of that are. And the 2 points that I can look at for ZTE and Huawei is that this administration and this Justice Department has been very critical of 2 companies that are very competitive in technology infrastructure, building cell towers, and will be the backbone of many other countries' 5G rollout. And 5G has become this big buzz term. We're going to be talking about that with Sprint and T-Mobile too. 5G. We're getting really hung up on 5G when there really isn't a properly approved standard for what 5G will be yet. We're still working out all the kinks there, and it'll probably be determined in much the same way that LTE 4G was determined. A bunch of companies just started doing stuff, and then eventually manufacturers of the consumer side and the tower side all just sort of agreed, okay, these are the basics that we at least need to support. So I was very skeptical of the actual consumer impact on that initial advisory. Now, with a company like ZTE, we did see, again, how they were potentially operating not necessarily in good faith, where we have certain trade sanctions against certain companies, and ZTE violated those sanctions while utilizing American technologies. Like if you've got a Qualcomm chipset in your phone, for example, or Qualcomm hardware in one of your towers, and there's a sanction against Iran, and then it's found out that you're doing business with a company that the United States has sanctions against, well, that's not necessarily a smart move. The big deal there was the terms of the settlement not being carried through. So law enforcement said, ZTE, you broke these sanctions. Here are your fines. And here's the jail time we expect executives to serve. ZTE didn't report back correctly what fines were paid and who served jail time. I'm grossly oversimplifying, but that's why we saw the second hammer come down under this administration much harder, with the 7-year ban on American technologies being incorporated in ZTE products. So if Huawei has followed similar business practices to what ZTE did with these trade sanctions, then we are at the very beginning stages of what ZTE went through. But with the Justice Department, that's probably not going to play nice in that first round. If there's any violation there, I would expect the Justice Department to come crashing down significantly harder than what originally happened to ZTE before ZTE misrepresented how they were complying with the potential penalties. So that to me is a different situation. I still don't believe that Huawei products, the actual consumer produced products that you buy in boxes you can have in your hand, my Mate 10 Pro, Honor branded gear too, which is sort of under the umbrella of a lot of Huawei manufacturing, my View 10. If you have one of these products, I don't believe that you're in any bigger risk. If these products are pulled from store shelves or pulled from online retailers, I don't believe that you're under any greater risk than any other smartphone manufacturer out there. But if it turns out that they were engaged in undesirable business practices to how the United States wants the world to conduct business, I can at least appreciate why our DOJ is now, stomping their feet and throwing their fists in the air more aggressively than just, well, we want the 5G cell towers. Again, it's a difficult situation to unravel because there are so many moving parts, but that would be very disappointing. Now, that being said, I don't know what the final fallout of all of this might be because we're still at the beginnings of the investigation. And do I necessarily trust this Justice Department to conduct the fairest, least biased examination of all of this material when we've got a number of people in government right now that have been very clear as to what the outcome they want is, regardless of the facts, regardless of the evidence. So when you've got Tom Cotton, a Republican out of Arkansas, saying right now, here, let me go through this. This is part of the Wall Street Journal. Huawei in 2017 led the global telecom equipment market with a 27% share. ZTE ranked fourth with 10%. Their U.S. market share is less than 1% for cellular and landline networks, compared with 48% for Finland's Nokia Group and Sweden's Ericsson AB. So Huawei represents 1% in the United States for telecom and infrastructure, hardware and business. So 1% is not significant. That's not any type of insane burden for a Chinese company to be doing business on American soil. So Senator Tom Cotton's response to this is, that pleases me that it's only 1%, although it's not zero, and that's where I'd like to get it. So I feel I don't have evidence, and we need to see evidence, and we need to see law enforcement, and we need to see what's actually generated out of these law enforcement advisories and Justice Department investigations. But that, to me, would make this feel like the deck has been stacked against Huawei and ZTE, and the scrutiny of their business practices might be unfairly represented in the halls of our Justice Department, legal departments, and Congress in how these laws are created. So, for whatever reason, 5G has become this humongous boogeyman. Who's going to control 5G? Who's going to control 5G? And that's actually going to lead us. Let me use that to lead into Sprint and T-Mobile. I was actually going to cover some other stuff too. There was a funny story. Gal Gadot said she loves Huawei phones and tweeted it from an iPhone. But we don't need to get into all that right now. Sprint and T-Mobile to merge in bid to remake wireless market. So this is not the first time these two companies have tried to join forces. And under previous administrations, under the Obama administration, this was effectively blocked by regulators. But again, we're under a different administration who is a lot more merger and acquisition friendly. And again, one of the major reasons, the big plug from Jean Leger and from Sprint executives was, we need to join forces and reduce one major player in the market so that we'll have better roads to 5G infrastructure and rollout. 5G. Verizon's working on 5G. AT&T's working on 5G. Sprint and T-Mobile working on 5G. United States needs to lead the way on 5G. The only problem is 5G doesn't technically completely exist in a final finished format or spec that the world can actually utilize. So we're at that process war where we want to enact certain types of policy and certain types of restrictions on networks so that we can lead the way, but actually control and dominate next generation wireless tech. Especially because we still haven't really, in the United States, we're way behind on things like, gigabit LTE. Like, what markets actually have high data rate? Because the backbone of 5G is still going to be built on the data centers, the nodes, and the towers of what we use for LTE. And way too much of our country is woefully underserved in that regard. So my personal feeling, I don't think reducing competition is ever the best fit for consumers in the long run. I totally get where Sprint probably can't be competitive on its own, and T-Mobile is going to struggle against AT&T and Verizon by being a market disruptor and not a market leader. But going from 4 players in the market to 3 players in the market doesn't instill me with a lot of hope or faith or confidence that we're all going to get better products, more competitive pricing, better prices, better consumer access in the long run. I think we end up with a very similar market, but now with 3 players instead of 4, it's probably even easier for those players to work together on making sure that they can remain more profitable. We're only still through, we talked about it last week, AT&T and Verizon under investigation still, collusion, holding back eSIM technologies in their products. Why would you hold back eSIM? Is because it makes it easier for you to switch carriers. It makes it easier for consumers to actually compete against major corporations. I don't like how I'm doing business with AT&T. I can pay off my phone and go to T-Mobile, or I can go to Sprint, or I can go to Verizon, and I don't have to worry about unlocking SIMs or dealing with tech support issues, or I could just go. I can just take my phone and go. And Europe understands this a lot better. They never had this dumb CDMA technology in cell phones that Sprint and Verizon use, so you didn't have this fake illusion of competition. If you didn't like doing business with one carrier, you pulled out the SIM card, you went to another, and you gave them your money instead. Well, we've enacted a lot of obstacles to that in the United States. Again, if you're a conservative and you care about competition, you should care about being able to compete, not being locked in unfairly to contracts and services that prevent you from doing that. So going from 4 players to 3 also means I find it very dubious. I am very skeptical of the current argument that Sprint and T-Mobile joining forces will create jobs. They are claiming that they will create thousands of jobs in building 5G towers. That, I think, will probably be true. We will see Sprint and T-Mobile alongside Verizon and AT&T working with city governments, working with state governments to build a ton of towers. 5G, especially this new microsignal technology, microwave technology. You're going to need a lot more towers to actually lock in 5G signals the current way that we're building 5G. It's not that you just replace the tech that's on the tower. You need to build more of them. You need a greater density of signal equipment. So I do believe that we'll see some infrastructure jobs created. But one of the things that you need to do when you merge two major corporations is eliminate redundancies. And I think there are probably going to be many more redundant jobs between Sprint and T-Mobile that will create a deficit of jobs over the jobs that will be created in infrastructure and high technology. So call center jobs and stores. You know, you don't need a Sprint and a T-Mobile store in every mall. You don't need a Sprint and a T-Mobile store on opposite street corners 2 years after this merger goes through. That the Sprint brand, the Sprint ID, the all of that will eventually evaporate under the T-Mobile umbrella. T-Mobile wins in this case. So once you eliminate all of those jobs, I think we'll be at a net deficit for job creation. So again, all of these arguments, the scary boogeyman of losing our place in 5G, the current pro-corporation stance that this administration has taken, the phony arguments as to consumer jobs and enriching the middle class, all of this to me looks like it's eventually going to be not great for consumers that we're letting this one go through. And it's because it's the third and fourth place. You know, AT&T and Dish, I believe, are still under a bunch of regulatory scrutiny. Whenever Verizon buys out a company, it's under a lot of scrutiny. I mean, we're watching pieces of Yahoo get peeled off. Last week, we talked about Flickr getting bought out by SmugMug because Verizon is creating Oath, which is splintering off some pieces of Yahoo to satisfy regulators that this isn't going to be an antitrust issue. We've got a lot of problems, and I don't see where we've necessarily got great solutions to try and catch up with it. I shouldn't be hoping for SpaceX satellites providing satellite internet to be a competitor against, you know, landline and tower-based cell technologies. We need something else to act as a market disruptor. T-Mobile was a great market disruptor, but if now they're just the mega third place against the mega second place against the mega first place of Verizon, then I don't think consumers come out of this doing better. I think consumers come out of this with higher prices, fewer jobs, fewer choices, and more baggage in this market. I've got a ton of people talking about this one, too. Let's scroll back up. Oh, this is just funny from Ganzi Techner talking about the collusion from Samsung and Micron. The time frame of this collusion shall be divided among all the employees involved in the collusion for serving time as a just penalty. We shall talk about the monetary penalty at my office. So every employee of Samsung, Micron, and Hynix has to spend 3 minutes in jail. then that'll be an appropriate penalty for the collusion of these three major corporations. From Peter Ford, once again, little guy gets screwed because low-end or mid-range cost-wise are going to be banned. From B. Floyd, I don't think that the Sprint and T-Mobile merger was blocked last time. The big issue was with ownership and corporation voting rights. It wasn't outright blocked. It's just that we had a lot of regulatory barriers that Sprint and T-Mobile could have jumped through. I think they could have fulfilled this merger under the Obama administration, but it would have required a lot of work, a number of concessions that I don't think they were willing to give up. And then your points, you know, again, if you were a Sprint shareholder right now, I think you're about to get screwed. Because again, Sprint's valuation, pretty low. Some people are saying it's not even worth what the company's been valued for. But again, if you had stock or if you were a shareholder, everything has been sort of a preferential shift to T-Mobile taking on this company in this acquisition. And to me, it's not hostile, but it's pretty close. Let me get this down here. Peter Ford Sprint was last on the poll getting 4G straight, which is a shame because they were first for trying to get some type of 4G standard out. They just bet on WiMAX, and that was a bad play. From Ganzi Tech Nerd, trying to become a monopoly like Apple in the mobile network spectrum just worsens the service offerings. Consumers' voices become mute. Again, we don't have a big say in these kinds of conversations. And again, our media does a terrible job of reporting on this stuff. Disney buys up major corporations for media and entertainment, and the big headlines are going to be, oh, well, maybe we'll see X-Men in a future Marvel Cinema Universe movie, and how exciting would that be? You're like, well, yeah, that would be neat, but at what cost? Like 40 to 50% of active franchises in media production now go through Disney. Probably not great. And if you're a theater owner, you're probably pissed off about what Disney can do to you over Star Wars, over Marvel and the Avengers, now over, Spider-Man and Deadpool and X-Men and the Fantastic Four and all these other franchises. Same thing kind of happening here with T-Mobile and Sprint. Now we only have T-Mobile, Verizon, AT&T. And if they decide to all get in bed together, we'll have no hope of untangling that kind of collusion. From B. Floyd, Sprint is in debt. They cannot afford to build 4G. Also, they make a lot of dumb deals on their CDMA network. Yeah, I'm not saying that Sprint was going to be some great competitor, but we did see Sprint peeling off some current subscribers from other carriers because of price war. They weren't making money. They weren't making money on those consumers when you do we'll slash your bill in half, That's not a great business practice, but they could still act as a disruptor. And those types of moves, especially when Sprint would closely follow some of the uncarrier deals that T-Mobile was doing, we saw some great traction with that influencing Verizon and AT&T business practices too. I think there will be less incentive for three players in the market to act as aggressively against each other when you don't have a desperate company, a desperate Sprint, trying anything they can to get attention. A lot of conversation about this, talking about Clearwire, CDMA deals, wasting money on infrastructure. I think Sprint has been dealing with the fallout of acquisitions since iDen when they picked up Nextel. This company has not managed their resources well ever, in my opinion. From LGH, even in Europe, all countries have 3 or more network players. In the United States, for as large as the United States I don't think who is it? Is it US Cellular is like one of the last indie small former AT&T divestiture players. We could use something else in there. I was always hoping for some sort of wide area Wi-Fi or WiMAX style technology to pick up as cell phones became more data centric and less call centric. And now we've got these voice over LTE technologies. It would be really awesome. Again, I'm nervous about a Google getting into this space, but if Google could act as a disruptor with a next generation Project Fi and Google Fiber crossover, that could be really exciting because or SpaceX. SpaceX satellites could fulfill voice over data, voice over IP calling with traditional phone numbers in a Project Fi or a Google Voice style delivery system, even Skype style delivery system. Even that could be a huge disruption point. I would jump on that, do business with them in a heartbeat, and just kill my AT&T, not roll over to T-Mobile, and just go VoIP instead. That would be awesome. So from Gabaletta, my biggest concern with this deal is how are they going to play together considering one uses CDMA and the other uses GSM. So this actually I don't think is going to be a huge concern. This is something I brought up on the Board at Work podcast because I wasn't sure exactly what the deal was going to resemble. And now with more news, most of Sprint's phones are actually world-capable devices. So already they have a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of the phones that are currently being sold on Sprint, and I think over the last year or two having been sold on Sprint, already have the hardware to be used in other GSM markets. So this actually could be a pretty big boon for Sprint customers, because in my area, Sprint coverage is terrible. One block, I'm getting amazing LTE, and literally I can drive literally another block, be kicked down to 3G CDMA, and watch my download speed plummet to like 800 kilobits, and then 2 blocks later be back up to like a 10 megabit LTE connection. It's super spotty out here in the valley. It's not consistent. But we've already seen, a lot of phones that support Project Fi, Pixel and Nexus devices had no problems hopping back and forth between T-Mobile and Sprint networks. Well, Sprint phones, with just a simple patch to the radio manager, could probably do the same. And that's actually cited in the Wall Street Journal article, that even before this merger goes through, there does seem to be a deal in place now, currently, that T-Mobile will allow Sprint devices to roam on their network. So while the biggest part of that is obviously going to be LTE, if you got just a little firmware bump, a little security update or security patch from Sprint, I'm pretty confident they could unlock the GSM capabilities on the world devices that they sell. And I'd be willing to bet that most Samsungs and iPhones would have no problems signal jumping between Sprint and T-Mobile towers. To the flip side, I don't know if that's always going to hold true for T-Mobile devices, but for some of them that maybe are built unlocked with all radios supported, maybe you'd see some benefit. Like say you're just really close to a Sprint tower and you have a T-Mobile phone and you have that kind of hardware built in. But the flip side is definitely true. I think most modern Sprint devices will get a benefit in being able to hop onto T-Mobile towers. And then also that should help reduce the number of times they have to fall back on 3G. So if the phone has to make a choice between falling back on 3G CDMA, not great, or jumping over to a T-Mobile LTE tower, and they can make that transition, then the consumer ends up with a significantly better quality of service. From Yukimi, I really, really don't want Google involved in the wireless industry. I like my privacy and having some sort of competition because, Google will try to buy everyone. From Ganzi Tech Nerd replying to Yukimi, Google is deeply embedded in our daily lives and traps have been laid out far into the future to ensure that personal data mining breaks through the privacy firewall and we would never know. And then one last from Gabaletta. My general concern with this merger is they're focusing on both technologies and dooming themselves. Sorry, I'm going to take this all over again. From Gabaletta. My general concern with this merger is they are focusing on both technologies and dooming themselves instead of focusing on one and moving forward. But I think that there is actually a good reason for that. Between T-Mobile and Sprint, they actually own a really wide swath of spectrum. If I remember correctly, and please someone correct me if I'm getting this wrong, that T-Mobile has more investment in higher frequency, better speed, but poorer building penetration, and then a pretty good base of low frequency, which is slower connection speed, but better building penetration. And Sprint has a really solid investment in lower to medium frequency spectrum air, so that between the two companies, they would actually have, I think, the best collection of all spectrums to roll out better LTE solutions and 4G solutions, better fallback solutions in the 3G spectrum for however long we maintain 3G before we devalue it, and then T-Mobile would be able to fulfill the high frequency end of the spectrum for 5G and higher frequency, higher speed connectivity. That was at least as how it was described to me. AT&T and Verizon weren't able to buy up as complete a collection of spectrum from the last time that we sold off air. T-Mobile and Sprint both got good chunks, but together they would have the more complete solution across the board. Now, what that might mean for maintaining CDMA tech and GSM 3G tech and all that stuff, I don't know. But from Sharil, the merger is sounding more like T-Mobile buying Sprint for bands mainly. I think it's the psychology of having more subscribers. This would push them into the 100 million subscriber zone. I think it does help them with infrastructure in the towers. So like T-Mobile will have to build fewer towers once they start converting Sprint towers over into 5G connectivity. And then you're absolutely right. I think this is a huge deal for them that they would be picking up more spectrum, more air to do business in. So I've got one last story here. And again, this is a hopeful note to end on. We were talking about artificially inflating RAM prices because of Samsung colluding with their competitors. We've been talking about PC building and sort of the disappointing era for Intel not being able to manage their 10 nanometer transition. And we've been looking at the PC building market, especially GPU prices, artificially inflated because of cryptocurrencies, but instability in the cryptocurrency market right now has led to a fairly steep drop-off in crypto markets, and this is coming from PC Games, PCGameSN.com. Graphics card makers will be forced to slash prices after GPU shipments fall by 40%. So we're seeing a number of crypto solutions and strategies trying to alleviate some of the power draw by shifting over how the blockchain is maintained. We're seeing a drop just in the sort of crypto miners that are investing in their own hardware. And then, people building gaming PCs have been sitting on the sidelines waiting for this market to level off a little bit right before we get to the next generation of cards coming out. A GTX 1180 on the horizon. I don't think we're necessarily going to see in this next wave, a refined Vega card from AMD, but that's also on the horizon too. So a lot of us who have been waiting to rebuild PCs, we've been looking at the future of this market, seeing process improvements from AMD on Ryzen, seeing process improvements from NVIDIA. We're not looking to spend $1,300, $1,400 on a 1080 Ti when an 1180 is right around the corner, and we're going to be trying to put our money towards the best possible impact. So with all of those things working together, now if you were looking at trying to shop a card, we might actually be getting close to MSRP again. Huzzah! So I'm still totally stuck. I don't know. Are any of you out there looking at rebuilding your PC, or are any of you out there trying to do like some upgrades? Because I was really looking at the beginning of this year, thinking about when I wanted to build a Threadripper with a 1080 Ti. That's what I wanted to do at the very beginning of this year. And I've put it on pause and I put it on hold for so long now that I might wait for the Ryzen 2 version of a Threadripper and an 1180, or maybe I really want to get an AMD card. I really want to support AMD with my wallet. I really want to vote with my dollars. I just don't know if they'll be in place before I can. So this is the big question to you. Do you see this as being a boon, or do you think that this is just companies trying to purge their current manufacturing lines before they start putting out new hardware, and we see another arms race for companies and individuals who might be trying to do some crypto, might be trying to improve their process, their blockchain, trying to improve their profit, hopefully with graphics cards that use less power but are more powerful in terms of number crunching. I think that we might get stuck here because I think this market is also about to get flooded by used cards in this space. Companies that are pulling out of crypto, trying to sell off gear that's been used really, really hot. And then people who are, trying to dump graphics cards just because they were gamers and enthusiasts being lost in that second-hand market. The used market is going to look really ugly because of this crypto fad and the speculator bubble on this kind of hardware. So this comes from Sharil. RE GPU prices going down. I will believe it when I see it. The worst part is that the second-hand market will lag in the price reduction. I'll be really curious to see if the bottom falls out. and we see these cards significantly undervalued for the secondhand market, then we could see sort of boom bust. Little bubbles inflate, then pop, little bubbles inflate, then pop, and it would be kind of like the housing market. If you buy in at the right time, you could get a great deal, but you've got to wait for these fluctuations to rise and fall. From Yukimi, I hope AMD and NVIDIA remove or block crypto mining so the cards are not insanely overpriced. Make special cards for crypto. I don't think we'll see that because they have an interest in selling as many cards as possible. So if they sell a card that goes into a crypto rig, they're going to want to sell the same kind of card to everybody, and then that also helps the secondhand market too. Crypto miner probably isn't going to want to buy a headless GPU. Right? Because if they need to sell off that gear to recoup some lost investment, they're going to want to be able to sell off cards to gamers or to other crypto miners, not just crypto miners. If the entire crypto market bubble breaks, then they're stuck with hardware that no one else can use. At the same time, this is also coming from Games End, PC Games End. They reported earlier in the month that cryptocurrency mining machine manufacturers were being asked to halt planned shipments of their ASICs due to lackluster replacement demand for mining machines. And we're also seeing some shift in how companies, in how crypto is valuing blockchain mining. So this is from the same article. Ethereum's developers in particular have just published their proposal for moving away from the potential grasp of mining ASICs and GPUs with their transition towards a proof of stake rather than proof of work consensus model. Their hybrid model will cut potential block rewards for miners from 3 Ethereum, to just 0.6 ETH per block. And that's a massive drop of 80%. So if you were dumping tons of hardware into Ethereum, as one example, and then you heard that your potential recoup would face an 80% drop in your profitability, that would make it less desirable for you to be jumping on this kind of hardware too. So those types of changes, I think, are actually going to have a bigger impact on GPU pricing and blockchain mining than whether or not AMD or NVIDIA tried to artificially halt manufacturers from buying cards that should go to gamers. From Fat Produce, I already bought a GTX 1060. Oops. No, dude, your 1060 is going to do fine. To follow some of the other sentiment here, we'll believe price drops when we see them, and you've been enjoying your new card, so I wouldn't get too hung up about that. Also, your 1060 was probably bought not at peak, so if you were trying to buy a 1080 Ti right now, that's one of those cards that's radically overinflated and overpriced and overvalued. 1060 was probably coming in at least close to MSRP. I seriously doubt you would have paid out the nose too bad for that. From Ganzi Tech Nerd, I am planning to make a new Threadripper build as I am working with Red Monstro 8K cameras in my production house. You're ahead of me there, man. I'm just trying to reduce some of my render times on high quality 4K video. I haven't even contemplated trying to make the jump to 8K or anything like that. From Yukimi, I never trusted crypto mainly because it's too volatile and not worth anything as a currency. It's just a dangerous stock market that will crash at any moment. From Cheryl, do you think Newegg would do a review for used crypto GPUs to see how the cards have been used and abused and see if it's a good idea to purchase one as a daily driver? That's an excellent idea for an article. Newegg might not pick that up, but I'll see if I can talk to the guys over at Game Crate to see if they have any thoughts on it. From Reno, I think I probably have the only 295x2 on Earth that hasn't been mined on. You might. I even tried mining on my GTX 970, and the 970 is such a dog of a card that I ran my PC Bitcoin mining for an entire weekend, and I think I made 80 cents. So for 2 days of running my PC as a miner, I made 80 cents. You can just taste that profit, right? Crypto is going to be so good. Tasty. Well, folks, we should probably start wrapping this up. I wanted to get back to some of those questions that I've already forgotten from people who posted them earlier. I'll try and scroll up through some of this, but if there was something that I asked you to remind me about later on, this would be the time to do it before my voice completely futzes out. I still have to do another podcast tonight because we're going to be doing the Geek Book Club as a live broadcast too. I believe I forget who wrote it, but someone asked about the Linus iMac issue, and I can at least kind of bring up my thoughts on that. It was Adita. I've already forgotten how to pronounce your name. So there was a story that broke a little bit more than a week ago, almost 2 weeks ago. Linus Tech Tips. So Linus has a reputation for breaking PCs and dropping components and all of that fun stuff. So he has the new iMac Pro, a 5K iMac, and while taking it apart to show all the stuff that was inside of it, one of his assistants dropped the screen and broke a bunch of stuff on the panel, the actual display panel of the new iMac. And they go through their experiences in trying to get it serviced. It's a super brand new product. They take it to the Apple Store, and they're not trying to get it like warranty covered. They know that they enacted damage that is outside the warranty of the iMac. And they detail their accounts with Apple tech support, how the product is held for them for like a week, how they're getting updates on the potential support where this product is now not going to be repaired, and they're going to just hold it for them, give them the iMac back unrepaired, and then they reference, well, maybe you can take it to a third-party repair shop, even though no third-party repair shop is authorized to repair the iMac, and anyone who could buy the parts so that they could repair the iMac themselves, that Linus could repair the iMac, would lose their Apple accreditation for being an authorized Apple support center. So it's a catch-22. This plays into a lot of things, because part of the reason why they're facing some of these issues is Apple works really hard to prevent you from opening the product. It's technically not legal to have some kind of stipulation in your terms of service that if you open a product that you purchased, that you own, that you can be denied warranty coverage, but there are other legal hoops that you can jump through as the manufacturer to make that process so insanely painful and undesirable that it's de facto not legal. And this also plays into the number of companies that try to fight right to repair. Apple is one of the leaders at trying to prevent third-party service shops from doing business, and from preventing consumers from cracking open their devices and not denying warranty coverage and warranty support. So I was in a similar situation when I had the iPhone 8 Plus. I got the iPhone 8 Plus in the first week that I was doing the camera review on the iPhone 8 Plus. I was crouched trying to do some comparison photos between the iPhone and a Galaxy, and the stupid, slippery, all-glass phone slid out of my pocket, fell less than 6 inches, because I was crouched, less than 6 inches into mud, which had concrete underneath the mud, and it dented the aluminum frame and cracked the top glass of the phone. It took me almost a month to get that phone replaced because Apple just didn't have any. It was a brand new product. They didn't have replacement parts. I had to get the entire phone swapped out. And only when they started having enough manufactured iPhone 8 Pluses that they could dedicate a small stock of iPhones to be used as replacement phones. And I had to pay for it. It was a paid replacement, not, well, this was, even the accidental damage under Apple Care. So when I went to the Apple Store to get that replaced, a month after the phone had come out, they only had one. If I had arrived later in the day, I probably would not have had access to that replacement phone. So what Linus is going through is kind of par for the course. If you're bleeding edge, you are probably the consumer who is most going to get screwed by a new product from any manufacturer. If you have an early issue with that product, you will be late in line. You will be at the back of the line for any kind of warranty or support. So let's say you bought a Galaxy Note on day one and your Note had problems. Samsung doesn't have a repair infrastructure in place to support you if your phone had problems. You're just going to have to wait until they have the ability to repair your phone. Doubtful, considering how fragile and disposable our phones are now, or until they have some kind of replacement phone or refurb that they can offer you instead. Same thing happened here with Linus. You're too early. You're bleeding edge. You get screwed. And this also comes down to products that have systemic problems, like the number of MacBooks that have had recalls or battery problems or hinges breaking, even though they're supposedly unibody. The insane number of Apple products where by the time Apple does acknowledge that there's a problem, it enacts some sort of long-term warranty repair, people who bought early in the first generation of that product almost always fall outside the window of that kind of warranty coverage or repair coverage. So this is why I always say you should wait. You should never be first in line. You will have a higher statistical likelihood of having a bad experience by being the first in line to try and pick up one of those products. Now, from Linus's perspective, the thing that actually bothered me the most was how much reality show, fake acting TV outrage he was trying to create by acting or pretending like this was a big surprise. I can't believe it. I'm so shocked. I bought a brand new product and Apple doesn't even have the stuff to properly support it weeks into the initial launch of this product. And now I'm going to show you real video of us in our office complaining about how terrible and unacceptable this is. And they would do like establishing and tracking shots, reality show TV style. And I think that grossly misrepresents what we do as tech reviewers on YouTube. Don't turn what we do into a reality TV show. There's one shot in Linus's depiction of what's going on where he's talking to one of his crew and that guy's on the phone and Linus is in that guy's face as he's supposedly talking to someone at the Apple store. You just tell them this is unacceptable. You tell them we'll go and pick it up and we'll get repairs, but we need a solution. And you're like, that didn't happen. That wasn't real. That was fake. There's another shot later on in his video where two other team members, one guy walks into the doorway, "Hey man, what's going on with the iMac?" And the other guy goes, "Oh, I don't know. We might not be able to get parts to repair it." Cut back to the guy in the doorway. "Dang, yo, that's a bummer." So fake. So fake. I have zero respect for reality TV staged interactions to try and build up some kind of outrage or build up some kind of controversy here. You should know what you're getting into, Linus, and you have a responsibility to properly depict that. So I think part of this is done well. Part of you saying it's actually not okay that a manufacturer puts out a product that they can't support. But you should detail that across the entire spectrum of products. You should detail that basically whenever something brand new comes out, you should be able to tell consumers it's going to be a while before we have replacements, it's going to be a while before we have refurbs, and it's going to be a while before we have spare parts to service those products. That's the reality of any new car, new computer, new toaster, new dishwasher. Anything that can be repaired, the newest first generation day one launch product is not going to have that stuff in the pipeline. But dramatizing that and creating fake reality show TV moments to try and get your viewers outraged is the wrong way to go about doing this. So I am historically and consistently upset with how Apple does business, and it makes me conflicted when I think one of their products might be a good fit for someone in my circle of family and friends. I try to disclose why I don't like doing business with Apple. That's pretty much gonna stay a constant part of my tech lifestyle. But I think Linus is actually more in the wrong here, not for how he treated the iMac, but for how he's going about producing a reality show style piece of media to try and make this more salacious than it really is. That to me is the bigger disservice to the tech community, is the bigger disservice for tech commentary, and he should know better. He should be able to do better than this. That's what I'm most disappointed by. So that's kind of where I come down on. Apple and Linus both suck in this situation. Neither, I think, are doing a good job of being the guide or the manufacturer that each claims to be. But more, my side of this equation is on tech commentary. My bread and butter is made through producing content, and I desperately don't want to see us go down the rabbit hole of making reality shows out of tech reviews. That's crap. That's a terrible place for us to go. So everybody loses. Nobody wins. It's like the opposite of a Doctor Who ending. You know, everybody lives. No. Like in this situation, the two players involved, everybody dies. This is terrible. So I'm gonna wrap this show up. I thank you all so much. I got some amazing conversation, some amazing commentary here, and again, sticking with me through a really long ass podcast. I really appreciate the conversation and the recap and all the chatter here, especially watching you people tune in live and share your thoughts. I really appreciate it. And of course, as always, you can catch me around the internet at SomeGadgetGuy. Later tonight, I'm going to be hosting the Geek Book Club, talking about Master and Commander with my buddy Andrew Wallace at Fat Produce, who's been very active in these comments here. You definitely want to check that out for your geeky book reading fix. Once a month, we read a book and we review it and we talk about it. So that's going to be a lot of fun. And if you have any other tech commentary, tech questions coming out, definitely hit me up on the Twitters and the Instagrams and anywhere else that I might be. Probably not so much on the Google Pluses or the Facebooks, but you can try. You know, you never know. You might find me there too. And be on the lookout maybe tomorrow morning for the full in-depth camera review on the Honor View 10, and then later in the week, or maybe over this next weekend, my full review on this phone, my long-term review, having used this phone for a couple months. I'll be excited to share that with you guys too, because I think the mid-range could definitely use a little love and attention as we're talking about $1,000 plus high-end flagship phones. So once again, thanks so much for watching. You know where you can find the next Monday morning tech chat, as it will likely be on a Monday and in the morning Pacific time. I am Juan Carlos Bagnell, Some Gadget Guy, and I will catch you all on the next SGGQA podcast chat. Be well, take care. I'll see you next time.